Today we're looking at Psalm chapter 28. It's an interesting psalm from this perspective that in the psalm you'll see different shades of prayer or different kinds of prayer and different emotions as David is speaking this prayer. And as we suggested in our journey in prayer in the book of Psalms, there is just a wide scope of emotions where David will pour out his anger at times and his anxiety. And the important thing to remember is that prayer has it just can't be some ritual, pious pablum of prayer. You need to be real in prayer and express what's in your heart. And so we're going to see this in Psalm chapter 28, and we'll begin in verse number 1. And I want to preface verse number 1 is that there's a certain risk in prayer, and the risk is that prayer can put your faith at risk. And what I mean by that is if prayer is not answered and heaven is silent, uh, people can give up on prayer or just don't believe that God answers prayer. And so silence is difficult. When God doesn't answer or doesn't appear to answer, it can put your faith at risk. That's a real challenge, but the Bible's real, and David expresses a lot of times about his anxiety about God's silence in prayer. So look at verse number 1 for just a moment. And here we might even call it a petition, if you will, where you're asking God for something. And here what he's asking God is not to be silent. So unto thee I cry, and there's the voice that is loud and expressive. It's not always just a prayer in your heart and mind, but you're expressing your voice in prayer. And he says right in the beginning, as you notice, even though he's concerned about God being silent, he still turns to God about that. God, don't be silent. Answer my prayer, and be not silent to me. Think about praying like that for just a moment. Going to God and saying, God, answer my prayer. Don't be silent. Respond to my prayer. And you know as well as I do that if there's no answer and no voice comes back to you and there doesn't appear or seem to be an answer, you see what I mean by saying prayer can put faith at risk. And a lot of people have given up on prayer just on that very thing. So he says, if thou be silent, I will become like those who go down to the pit or the grave. Of course, the man in the grave, he can't speak, and his voice is not heard. And David is concerned that if you don't answer my prayer, I'll be just like those people that you do not hear, who are dead men. Now notice verse 2. Again, here's an invocation, if you want to call it that. To invoke on something is to call. And so he's just saying, hear my voice in my supplications. That is just simply my request. When I cry unto thee, I lift up my hands toward your holy oracle. Verse number 3, I want you to see the emotion here. Now, the emotion of silence, I've already mentioned there's anxiety there, isn't there? I mean, there's a lot of worry there if God doesn't answer. And verse 3, he says, here, draw me away, do not rather draw me away from the wicked with the workers of iniquity, which speak peace to their neighbors, but mischief or evil is in their hearts. So just let me explain what he's saying. Some people can be talking to you, and I mean talking to you real nice, but in their heart they either envy you or hate you. You don't know what they're really up to. And here he's talking about the wicked as pretentious people who pretend to like you, or they're talking to you like you're a good neighbor, but they got something up their sleeve. And so David said, don't let me go down or be swept away like those people. Isn't that interesting? God, don't let me fall into the same trap or end up in the pit like these evil men. Notice here, and when I talk about it being sort of a prayer, it's dominated either by fear. I don't want God, don't let me end up like those people. and pray that prayer. Then in verse 4, you're going to see that there's anger in the prayer. See, we already talked about, notice again, as you're pouring out your emotions to God, sometimes there's anxiety. You may go to God and say, God, I'm worried, I'm anxious. Please answer the prayer. Don't be silent. I don't want to lose my faith. Then he talks about here, you see in verse 4, about being angry with the wicked. Now, you know there's a tension, isn't there? Because we're to love even our enemies, but there's a tension there, and the tension is we don't like what they do. In fact, we abhor and hate what they do. And so in a prayer like this, he's praying, you see, with anger about what the enemies are like and how deceitful and cunning, and he abhors their works. I mean, there are people out there right now just planning and scheming mischief about doing evil things, all kind of terrible, horrible things, from abuse to child molestation to all kind of things that we could throw in there. And David hates that. You can see in the prayer how angry he is with the wicked, and he's praying for God to deal with the wicked people. Now, we don't pray like that. We ought to be praying God either restrain them, or somehow their hearts will open, that they'll stop doing these kind of things. Pray for them that, this stuff will stop. But nevertheless, David wants it to stop, and he's asking God to stop it. And sometimes God's the only one that can do that. Now, so he says, give them, see this? Now I want you to see this. I want you to know it's biblical. Give them according to their works and according to the wickedness of their endeavors. Give them after the works of their hand. Render them in the desert. Now, verse 5. But they regard not. Now here's another reason why they're wicked. You wouldn't think that verse be in the Bible, would you? But he says, because they regard not the works of the Lord, the goodness of God, and all that God has done, and the operations of his hand, he shall destroy them. Verse number 6. Now here, watch it. We've been moving into prayer from anxiety, and we've seen the anger in David's prayer, and we see some fear not ending up like them. And now you see praise. Look at all the emotions and the movement that's going on in this prayer. And notice here, he'll say, blessed be the Lord. There's the prayer of praise, thanking God for answering prayer. Be not silent. But now when you get down to here, he believes and is convicted that God has answered his prayer. And there's praise and there's joy. I mean, when God answers your prayer, you need to thank him out of gratitude. And then he says, the Lord is my shield. Now watch what happens here. Since God has heard his prayer, it builds his faith and it builds his strength. And that's why it says the Lord is the strength and my shield. You see how close that prayer connects you to God. And that's why we're going through the Psalms, so you can see how important and vital prayer is, that it builds that relationship and gives you the stamina and the strength to live in life when you're facing all kinds of circumstances. Oh, Lord, you heard me now. And notice here, the Lord is my strength. He's my saving strength and his anointed. And then there's the intercession. Look what's all going on in this prayer. Now you see David is praying for the people. He's not just praying for himself, but he's praying for the people. We call that intercession. And notice this, save thy people and bless thy inheritance, feed them also and lift them up forever. How about that? I mean, this is really a great prayer, isn't it? Now I hope that as you're studying with me and going through this, that you're learning how to pray and about in every circumstances of life, because if you read the Psalms and you get a good understanding what David is saying, it will make your prayer life more vital and more alive as we build that relationship with God. Keep on praying, and I'll see you tomorrow. We're looking at Psalm chapter 29.